Welcome back to another one of the medical school application guide videos that I'm making. This is a series where I pretty much run through the ins and outs of how to apply to every single graduate entry medical program in Australia. As you know, I'll be applying to pretty much every single school in the country this year. It's actually kind of weird to say this year. I really don't know much about any of them, so I figured why not just turn my research into research for everybody. We've already done Sydney, Uni Melb and Griffith Uni as well, and now we're going to be going south. We're going to be going to, in South Australia, Flinders University, and if I was to sum it up, I would say that Flinders is the University of Sub-Quotas. It's kind of weird, like every uni I've noticed as I've gone through the research so far, we're only 4 in, but they've all kind of got their own little quirks and kind of distinguishing features about them. Like Uni Melb, for example, they're like the pathways uni. They had like 5 or 6 different pathways into the program. And then Sydney just had heaps of different rural streams and everything going on. Griffith, they had just like a bazillion different eligible degrees to be able to apply with. And now Flinders have just a bunch of sub-quotas, which we're going to go through all of those. But for real though, like the uni actually looks really cool. It looks like it's got a really good vibe about it. It kind of seems like a smaller university. It's definitely got a smaller intake. And I mean, the architecture alone is enough to sell me, to be honest. Like if you look at this building, like hell, I didn't know that Flinders was that close to, I didn't know that any university was that close to the ocean, apart from maybe like the Queensland ones and the Gold Coast and stuff. I didn't know it was that close to the ocean. Insane stuff. It's really cool. So, I mean, studying there, you've got views for days if that's the only thing you're going for, apart from the actual medical program itself. But anyway, let's get into it. As always, I'll link all the important documents and sites and everything below in the description. It's also important to note that Flinders is a non-GAMSAT school, so that means that your application to Flinders is completely separate from your other applications. Same way that like Sydney is a direct application, you'll be applying straight to Flinders University. And then I'll also mention as well, I didn't put this in the start of some of the others, but I am by no means an expert on this. Just because I'm making a video on it does not mean that I'm actually like 100% clear on absolutely everything. I researched this for the sake of my own applications and for the video itself. I don't necessarily cover absolutely every single minute detail. I try to cover as much as possible. But obviously, if you're in a bit of doubt or you're not sure about your specific circumstances and it's very specific, like you've done some kind of transfer or you've got credit from this or that, I truthfully don't really understand the process to that level of detail, and you're probably best off approaching the uni. I'll link their contact information below as well. They say to just email, I think it's askflinders@, and then it's like an edu email or something like that. And then finally, I've gotten a lot of comments about chances in terms of GPA and GAMSAT scores. As always, like I try to talk as much as possible about like what's required, what's competitive, but like everybody else, I'm in the same boat as you. I have no idea what is actually going to have a particular chance. We can only get rough gauges on what minimums were. Some unis publish cutoffs and that kind of thing. But if you're looking for a specific chance of getting in, I'm not an expert on that stuff. I don't have the inside knowledge of how they do intakes. So again, you're probably better off approaching the uni if they're willing to give you any insight on that. I'm in the same boat as you. It's frustrating that we don't have a whole lot of certainty, but there's a lot of factors that play into it realistically. I mean, scores one year are going to change in the next year, and it really depends a lot on like personal circumstances, special entry schemes that might be available to you, specific things to the uni as well as like demand and the competitiveness of the cohort year to year. So, you know, if you're thinking, oh, I've got a GPA of 6.1 and a GAMSAT of 68 or something, do I have a chance at this, or what are my chances? I really can't say, and I'm not trying to be rude about it, but I would like to know the answer to those questions myself, but we just have to kind of sit tight and wait until outcomes of our application, basically. All right, anyway, enough blabbering. Let's get actually into it. So I figured as a bit of like a content section, I'm going to run through the timeline first. I normally do the timeline at the end once we've gone through all the details, but this one's a bit more of a complicated process, or at least there's a few kind of divisions to it. So I'm going to kind of run through all of that. That will highlight all the bits and pieces that we're going to go through. So this is actually based off of the 2022 entry timeline. So it is a year old. We don't actually have the dates of the timeline or the details or the admissions guide published for 2023 entry. And if you're watching this like further into the future, because I kind of forget that people might be watching this in like 5 years time, then definitely check that the information in this video is still up to date, because things have probably changed as the years go on. I wouldn't expect too much to change from 2022 to 2023 entry though, so we're going to use this as a rough guideline. I'm also going to be reading off my laptop screen because there's no way I'm going to memorize all these dates for you, or else I'd be editing in, I'd have to go sentence by sentence and edit them one by one, so there's no way I'm doing that. In the 2021 application year for 2022 entry, the 21st of May MD applications guide was published, and then 3 days later the applications opened, which is a little bit strange. So we're not going to actually see the applications guide come out until right before applications open. The nice thing is that it's towards the end of May, it should be around about the time when GAMSAT results get released for the March sitting of 22. So you'll already be aware of your results by the time you're reading this and applying. And the other thing is most GEMSAS applications are going to be submitted by then, because they run kind of across the month of May. So it's staggered by about a month, which makes things a little bit easier. Then after applications open, then late May GAMSAT results get released. It was the 18th of May for the March sitting in 21. So we'd expect around about the same timeline. 25th of June, statutory declarations, or stat decks if I refer to them like that, for any kind of sub-quotas, which we'll talk about, will be due, and applications will be due as well. So again, you've got about a month from late May to late June to get everything in. Then there's a couple of other deadlines that get pushed to a little bit later to give you a little bit more time to arrange them. So 16th of July, payment of the application processing fee is due. Then the end of July, a lot of things are due then. Pretty much everything has to be finalized by the 31st of July. So it says that the official academic transcript showing semester 1 results for 2022 will need to be due in by that point. That's for those that are in their final year of undergraduate study in the year of application in this year. And then submission of any transcript for 1 year bachelor's and 1 year honours, if you're using one of those, we'll get into that in more detail. They would also be due by the 31st of July. Then the other thing, I've separated it, is supporting documents for any of the sub-quotas. So rural streams, which is not a sub-quota, but a stream more so. Then we've got the Northern Territory group and the humanitarian or visa sub-quotas. All of this documentation due in by the 31st of July for proof. And then mid to late August, interview offers come out in line with GEMSAS interview offers. And then early September, same kind of timeline as GEMSAS schools, interview administration fee is due in early September. So they actually charge a $55 fee for the interview itself. So you have to pay that before you can sit your interview. That, I guess, confirms it. And then the 20th of September to the 1st of October is when they did the interviews in South Australia. And they also have a group of students learning in the Northern Territory, or an intake for the Northern Territory, which was news to me. And those applications or those interviews are held in the Northern Territory. Otherwise, they'll be done online if they can't do it, from the 21st to the 23rd of September. Smaller group, fewer days. And then late October to mid-Feb is when the offers can come out. Obviously, most of them will come out late October, early November, but I say mid-February all the way through because later round offers could be made as well up to that point, right up until the start of the course itself. Then the 31st of December of the application year is the deadline for final academic transcripts for students in their final year. So this is just a hurdle to make sure that you've continued to successfully complete that final semester, but it doesn't look like your GPA is actually going to be calculated or anything like that. They don't seem to have anything about upholding a particular GPA, like Unimelb, I think, say that you're allowed to drop by 0.3 or something to hold your conditional offer. There's no mention of that in the Flinders one, so don't quote me on it, but that may be the case, that you just have to successfully complete it with no fails in any way. So now what we'll do is the usual kind of breakdown of all the place types. This is where things get a little bit kind of trickier. I'm going to split it. So they've got the majority of their students are in South Australia, but they also have a Northern Territory medical program as well. So they actually partner with the Northern Territory government, and they actually have a school set up in Darwin as well. So starting with South Australia, I'll go through the numbers there. There's up to 75 CSP places. These might change for 2023 intake, but they generally don't. They're government backed, so they usually don't fluctuate a whole lot. And there's also up to 6 full fee places available. So really quite a small intake, 81 places altogether. Of those 75 CSP, there's actually a lot of subdivisions and allocated spaces for sub-quotas. So of the 75 CSP, this includes bonded places and the non-bonded. They're made up of bonded and non-bonded places. The important thing is you don't preference whether you want bonded or non-bonded. They basically just create a pecking order. They offer the non-bonded places to the top ranked and they work their way down to the bonded places. So you're automatically considered for both when you apply. If you're a New Zealand citizen, you're eligible for a non-bonded place, but you're not eligible for a bonded place. So places are limited for you. In terms of sub-quotas then, within that 81 places, there's a minimum requirement, a minimum of 25% non-Flinders graduates. So people who have done their most recent study at a university other than Flinders Uni. And that is a minimum, not that it has to be 25%. It has to be at least 25%. So around about 20 places are going to be allocated minimum to non-Flinders. Up to 75%, so up to 60 roughly of those places are then sub-quoted for Flinders graduates. And this is obviously about making sure they keep their students in, they probably keep their funding, it probably keeps good demand and that kind of thing as well. We're seeing more and more unis do these kind of things in like setting up, even for like year 12 leavers and stuff like that. They create like package deals of an undergrad and then a guaranteed master's and that kind of thing to try and keep students. The important thing is that in terms of being a Flinders graduate to qualify, it only has to be that your most recent study is from Flinders University. It doesn't mean that just your undergraduate has to be or anything, just your most recent completed study has to have been at Flinders Uni. So for example, if you did your undergrad at a non-Flinders uni and then later on went on and did say a master's program or something like that at Flinders, then you would suddenly be eligible. Right, you would be eligible for the Flinders graduate sub-quota. You'd be considered a Flinders grad, even if they're using your undergrad for your GPA. Then if the reverse, if you're a Flinders undergraduate student, but then you've gone on and done a master's or some other program or a graduate certificate at another university, you're no longer eligible as a graduate of Flinders anymore. You're now considered a non-Flinders graduate. So again, they're really trying to make sure they keep their students in, right? Of the 75% maximum that are Flinders graduates, 25 of those maximum 60 places are already reserved for graduates of a handful of specific medical science or bioscience degrees at Flinders. If you're a graduate, and this again has to be most recent study, a Bachelor of Health Science, Bachelor of Medical Science excluding Vision Science, Paramedic Science, Public Health, or Science with Biotechnology in the medical biotech stream, any of those five courses, then you're eligible. But again, it has to be the most recent study. If you've done that and done something else at another uni, then you're no longer eligible. If you've done something and done something else at Flinders, you wouldn't be eligible for those 25 reserved places, but you would still be considered a Flinders graduate. So again, it's all about the most recent study. To give you a bit of a breakdown though, like these are limits that they set. It doesn't mean it's going to be an exact 75-25% split. So in 2021 intake, 69% of the intake were Flinders graduates and 31% were non-Flinders. So it's going to fluctuate year to year based on competitiveness. As well as that, inside of those CSP places, up to 5 places are reserved for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander applicants. There's also a rural sub-quota to be mindful of as well. We have, generally speaking, a federally backed 28% of CSP places need to be for rural applicants. And this is about trying to bridge the gap between metro and rural health. The same rule applies to be eligible for rural. You need to be living in an RA2 to 5 designated region for 5 years consecutively or 10 years cumulatively at some point in your life up to application. And then there's also the humanitarian sub-quota as well, or the humanitarian visa holder sub-quota, and there is up to 4 places available there as well in the South Australian group. So when you start really breaking that down, they've got those 81 places, but they're really broken down into lots and lots of little sub-quotas. So you'll probably be allocated, or you'll probably only be eligible for one of those subdivisions. And so you're going from 80 places down to maybe about 20 on average, 20, 25 places you might be fighting for. So expect it to be quite competitive overall. Then on top of that, then we've got, outside of South Australia, we've also got a Northern Territory medical program. So here there's 12 places available, or up to 12 places available. They're a little bit different though. They're not CSP or anything like that. They're a special type of bonded place, but they're bonded specifically to the Northern Territory. So they're actually a full fee place, but the fees are completely funded by the Northern Territory government. So as a student, if you were successful in getting one of these places, you actually wouldn't have to pay for your medical degree at all. There would be no fee help debt or anything like that. the Northern Territory government foots the bill for it in return for 4 years of return of service in the Northern Territory. Now, you might be thinking, great, free degree, I can go to the Northern Territory for 4 years and then come back. But there's a few more strings attached. So they're actually prioritising locals to the Northern Territory and also Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander applicants. And this is about making sure that people who are coming through this program are actually dedicated to living and practicing in the Northern Territory community. So it's really not about just trying to create a free, easier way into a medical program for, non-Northern Territorian Australian, Northern Territorian, I guess, to come in, do, 4 years of their degree and then 4 years of their first 4 years of their career and then just drop out and go back. That's not what it's about at all. They have priority categories, which we'll go through as well. Yeah, so in terms of qualifying, ideally, you don't have to be a Northern Territory resident, but you're going to be prioritised if you are. To be a resident, you need to have held a permanent Northern Territory address for at least 2 years of the last 6 years up until the end of the application year. So if you're applying in 2022, up until the end of 2022, you must have already at the time of application held an address for 2 years, or you must have held a permanent address in the Northern Territory for a total of 5 years since commencing primary school, which is a very weird one, but weird kind of cut off there, but that's what they're going with. In terms of selection, it's based on 4 priorities. So priority number 1 is applicants who identify as both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and they meet those requirements as a Northern Territory resident that I mentioned. Priority number 2, if priority 1 can't be filled, is then non-Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander applicants who are Northern Territory residents, again, meet those requirements. Third is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander applicants who are non-Northern Territory residents, and then finally non-Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander and non-Northern Territory residents. So this would be the bulk of people that might be watching this and thinking, oh, that might be a good way in, but you'd be prioritised last, and there's only 12 places, so chances are those places will be filled before they need to go to priority number 4. But if it's a relatively weak cohort in terms of demand, then it may slide all the way down to priority number 4, and that may be an option for you. But again, ethically, keep in mind, realistically, they want to see that people are actually going to stay there. They don't want people just coming in to go back to like one of the eastern states or another part of the country. So keep that in mind, that realistically those places should be going to people who are really going to make use of them. All right, so that's it for all of the places. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Minimum eligibility requirements. This is not selection criteria. These are just the minimum hurdles that you need to be eligible to actually apply to the Flinders University School. So the first one is citizenship. I mention this because they've got a couple of special rules. Normally it's stock standard and I don't mention it, but obviously you need to be either an Australian citizen, a permanent resident, humanitarian visa holder, or a New Zealand citizen to be eligible as a domestic applicant. Anything else is considered an international applicant. They don't have much detail on like what an international applicant goes through the process. I don't have this in the video, unfortunately, if you're looking for that. I will try to link some information down below, but they don't mention it, which makes me think they don't really get international applicants, or else they don't even have a program for it. But anyway, New Zealand permanent residents are actually considered international, and so not eligible for Northern Territory places. Only domestic applicants are available for places in the Northern Territory medical program. In terms of an eligible degree, it's a little bit tighter than some of the other schools. So you need to have either completed or be in your final year of an undergraduate degree. The other things that are counted though are a 1-year bachelor's and a 1-year honours degree. They're both counted as well. What is going on with you? Postgrads, so graduate certificates, master's degrees and PhDs are not counted. They don't count as an eligible degree. You can't use those for your GPA calculation. They are considered in terms of being a Flinders grad or not, but they're not considered one of the eligible degrees that you use for your actual application. The other weird thing is they don't have a 10-year rule. There's no 10-year rule at Flinders. So that means that if you did something, for 2023 intake, you need to have completed your degree after the 1st of January 2013. So if you completed your degree in 2012 or even earlier, then you would actually still be able to use that degree to apply for Flinders because they don't have the 10-year rule. The other thing is they don't have a minimum GPA requirement or anything. You can apply with any GPA. However, they do mention pretty sternly 5.5 is considered competitive, and we'll go through their version of how to calculate GPA. It's a little bit different, and in my mind, it's a little bit tougher to get a high score. So a 5.5 is actually quite high. In terms of GAMSAT, there's pretty much stock standard, right? So you need to have valid results within the last 2 years, and you need to also have the minimum of 50 in all 3 sections. We see that pretty much everywhere. And then one thing that is different though is, in order to have eligible results, the test that you sat must have been taken in either Australia, UK, or Ireland. In terms of selection criteria, we're looking at GPA, GAMSAT, and interview, pretty much the same way we see everything else. There's not a whole lot of changes here apart from the GPA scaling, so I'll go through that in a bit more detail, but I won't go through how to calculate GPA and stuff. You alright? You got the reverse sneezes going. Okay, so Flinders, they use a selection rank. We're going to first go through how the actual interview offers are made. They use a selection rank, which is just a 50-50 split of your GPA, calculated using their system, and your overall weighted GAMSAT score. So they don't use unweighted, they just use the clean GAMSAT score that you get given on your results statement from ASA with the ×2 weighting on section 3. They will, it looks like, rank everyone on this score. They don't say, they say that it's weighted 50-50, and they'll use this for selection for interviews. In terms of how the GPA is calculated, they have a slightly different scaling process. So I'll put it up on the screen. That's probably easiest to look at. But the main thing is that to get a 7, that actually requires an 85% or above. Most do 80 and above. So this is quite tight, and they go in then 10% increments until you get down the lower end before it drops off pretty quickly. And so lower GPAs, I find it's like, if I use mine, for example, my GEMSAS unweighted, I think was a 5.9, weighted was a 5.8 or so. Then I went through the calculation on Flinders. It was pretty demoralizing, actually. It was a 4.1. And so they still do a weighted GPA. They still do ×3 on your final year, ×2 on your second last year, and ×1 on your second last year. It's because of they don't have any 0.5s in their GPA scale. They're just going clean whole numbers. And so I had a lot of 4s in my third year, which absolutely killed my GPA. So I don't think I'll be very competitive there, but I'll still throw in the application, why not? As well as that, if you're worried about like exactly how to calculate yours, if you've got something weird going on, if you've done a summer subject or this or that, or you've done like an honours degree or blah, blah, they've got a whole bunch of different examples in their admissions guide. I'll link that below, check that out. It shows it in really good detail because it actually has the numbers, it shows how it's all calculated and so on. With GAMSAT, I mentioned before, a minimum of 50 in all 3 sections to qualify, but obviously to have a competitive score you need to have it up a little bit higher. I'll put this up on the screen as well. They actually post the minimum scores for entry in 2020 and 2021. So this is quite helpful for us. We can see obviously there was a pretty big spike because of the pandemic, particularly for 2021 intake. I don't know what the 2022 intake numbers were, but if we go through just a couple of them, you can see that most of you will be applying as non-Flinders graduates, non-rural, non-humanitarian visa. And you can see that went from a 66 to a 75. So obviously that's more so, I think, a product of a restriction on supply with an oversupply of demand or a lot of demand there. I don't know what that'll mean for 2023. We'll probably see similar numbers because I doubt they're going to massively increase their intake or anything like that. So that just shows you, pretty competitive requirements for your overall GAMSAT score. But obviously with some of the sub-quotas, you can have some lower scores. It makes sense. Less people competing for them, maybe a better kind of applicant to, we'll call it an applicant to place ratio or something. And you can see like rural, for example, that actually pushed up quite a way from 60 to 68. That's a pretty big bump. Those two would be used then to give you a spot at an interview. If you sit an interview, I won't go through them in a huge amount of detail because it's more about the admissions process, but it sounds like a single interview format rather than an MMI. They say expect 45 to 50 minutes or so to complete the whole thing. And it says that it's assessing quality of motivation, learning style and team skills, communication skills, pro-social attitude, personal management, and self-evaluation, approach to decision-making. Importantly, you must achieve at least 50% on the interview in order to be still eligible for a place. Doesn't mean you have to get 50% and you're a shoo-in, just means there's another hurdle requirement. Even if you got a 7 GPA and 100 GAMSAT, and then you came in, sat the interview, and then got 49%, you would not get a place according to their rules. That's pretty much it. In terms of the application process now, so we've got the first thing is you apply via the Flinders application system, the online application system, not through GEMSAS because they're not a GEMSAS school. In terms of preferences, you've got Bedford Park in South Australia, and then you've got Darwin in Northern Territory. Keep in mind that if you preference Northern Territory number 1, you are not considered for the South Australia group. So by the sounds of it, you can put South Australia first, Northern Territory second, but if you put Northern Territory number 1, that's your only opportunity. You're putting all your eggs in the one basket. And again, this is probably about making sure that the people who are applying are really serious about it to the point that they would forego an opportunity in South Australia. It's probably also about, people who are local to the Northern Territory. Makes sense that they would apply to somewhere that's local rather than having to move interstate. So again, it's probably about weeding out the people that are trying to game that system. There's also the Doctor of Medicine Rural Stream, MDRS. This is part of the South Australian group though. You need to, if you're considering this, indicate this in your preferences, and it'll also ask you to preference all the different clinical schools and locations as well. Then second thing that you'll have to do is put in all of your documentation, and as we said, there's a later deadline for this. So the first one is the official academic transcript. If you're a non-Flinders graduate, then you'll have to give them this. You do this usually through My Equals. You need to submit that. If you're a Flinders graduate, you don't have to do that. Obviously, the uni can already get access to all of your results. Importantly, it needs to be an electronic copy of the original certified academic transcript. It cannot just be a statement of results. Like, I'm sure if you log into your uni portal or whatever, you can probably get a statement of results, which is just like a standard PDF, but it doesn't have any emblem on it or any kind of security kind of features on it or anything like that. This needs to have a little blue ribbon, I believe it is, to certify that it's a certified copy. And you're allowed to submit an electronic PDF. You're also allowed to link an access code or an access link with a PIN number to the My Equals site as well, but I'd probably go with the PDF to be sure. And then you'll also have to submit documentation for sub-quotas, as we mentioned, so proof of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander identity, or that you are a holder of a valid humanitarian visa, that kind of thing, or proof of rurality and so on. In terms of your GAMSAT results, same as a GEMSAS school, you just give them a GAMSAT candidate number, ID number, which you should be able to access in your ACER account, and that will correspond to a particular sitting, and the results from that will then mean that Flinders can kind of pull the data from ACER and get your results and then use that to rank you. The important thing is you have to choose which sitting you'd like to use. So if you've got multiple eligible sittings and you have to choose all of them, Sydney lets you just take all of them in and they just take the one that works best for you in their algorithm. With Flinders, you have to pick the one that works best for you and submit just the one, pretty much to keep it simple. Doesn't matter about section scores. First of all, make sure you're picking, isolate the sittings that have more than 50 in all three, 50 or more in all three, and then finally choose the one of those that has the highest overall weighted GAMSAT score. That's the one that you want to go with. And then finally, the offers process. So again, pretty much stock standard. You'd get notified if you're unsuccessful. There's two ways to be unsuccessful. Either the interview performance was not satisfactory, or in other words, you didn't get 50% minimum and therefore no longer eligible, or it was that you got over the hurdle of the 50%, but your overall performance was not strong enough and then you weren't selected. The third outcome is where you get waitlisted. So they'll say the same thing. They'll say performance wasn't strong enough, but there may be offers made in a future round and you've been waitlisted. And so therefore you may expect an offer later in the later offer rounds. If you're successful in getting an offer, then you would get, if you're in your undergrad still and finishing it off, you'll get a conditional offer. You'll then just have to submit your final academic transcript by the end of the year, 31st of December, to prove that you've kept that up and finished it. I'd imagine they don't mention it, but if you've already finished your degree, then you probably have already got a firm unconditional offer at that point because they know that you've passed it all. They're happy with everything they've seen. There we go. Cool. And that's everything for Flinders. So this was quite a long one. There's a lot of little bits and pieces in this one. Usually the non-GEMSAS ones have exactly that because they're not streamlining the process with a bunch of other unis. So expect a little bit more detail, but hopefully this was all helpful. Hopefully it's given you some insight, gotten you thinking a little bit more about what your chances are. Shouldn't say that because I just said don't ask for chances. Yeah, hopefully it was all helpful, got you excited about applying. I'm excited to apply to this one, even though I don't think I have much of a chance with my 4.1 GPA, but oh well. Anyway, I will see you guys in the next one.